From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NOCO, a daily slice of Northern Colorado news and happenings. It's Wednesday, May 8th. I'm Erin O'Toole. Last summer was brutal for the Colorado River. Low water levels underscored the rising threats from a changing climate. Now we're waiting on next moves from state and federal governments. Several states have proposed new ways to divvy up water from the river, which serves about 40 million people in the southwest U.S. and Mexico. And the federal government has said it's up to the states to figure out how to use less water. So today we're breaking down what different groups are proposing, why they can't agree, and what comes next. Here to talk through all of this with us is Alex Hager, who covers water in the West for KUNC. Alex, welcome.
Hello, Erin. Thanks for having me.
So who exactly decides the future of the Colorado River? We know there's not one designated person. There is no river czar. So who is in charge of these decisions?
At the end of the day, the federal government writes the rules, but there is a long historical precedent that they kind of just do what the states tell them to. So this is really up to 7 states. They are divided into 2 groups. This is going to be important to remember here. One is the Upper Basin. That's Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico.
Right. The
other is the Lower Basin, California, Arizona, and Nevada. So if you think about it, that is a really diverse group. You've got water users from cattle ranchers in rural Wyoming all the way to big office buildings in downtown Los Angeles and a ton of cities and farms in between. So coming up with rules to satisfy that kind of group is no small feat.
I can see that. So what are the proposals that have been put forth so far?
So far, the 7 states that have to decide this, they are divided along very familiar lines. There are long-standing tensions between the Upper Basin and the Lower Basin. They go all the way back to the early days of managing water in the West, literally the 1920s.
Yeah, sounds like this tension did not start yesterday. Alex, let's start with our home territory, the Upper Basin, Colorado and its neighbors. What do they want?
Well, the Upper Basin has fewer people, it has less agriculture, but there is something really special about it. The Upper Basin is where the river starts. 85% of the water in the river begins as snow in the Rocky Mountains. And the vast majority of that is snow right here in Colorado. So we've got to take one quick step back and add a little context here. Colorado River law is really old. It is all based on this legal agreement written in 1922. It is really complicated, but all you need to know right now is one thing. Every year, the Upper Basin is legally required to send a certain amount of water down to California, Arizona, and Nevada. But now the Upper Basin says, hey, the game has changed. Climate change means we are looking at a way different water situation than we were when we wrote this up like 100 years ago. They're saying every year the Lower Basin folks get the same amount of water delivered, but we have to feel the pain when climate change brings less snow. So their proposal? It's saying the Upper Basin should be allowed to send less water down every year.
Okay, well, I can see why that might not go over so well in the Lower Basin. What do those folks have to say?
You know, right now, they're basically refusing to take the Upper Basin seriously. I will let one of them say it themselves. This is California's main water negotiator. His name is J.B. Hamby.
Arguing legal interpretations until we're all blue in the face doesn't do anything to proactively respond to climate change.
And to a certain extent, he's onto something there. The Upper Basin's proposal exists in kind of murky legal territory. We don't even know if it's allowed. It would have to be tested in court. So the Lower Basin is hitting back with its own plan. It's pretty dense, but the summary is this. They want a new system for measuring how much water is in reservoirs across the West, and a new system for distributing cutbacks that get triggered when those reservoirs are low. It's a system that is not kind of out there and untested like the Upper Basin proposal, but there are critics of that plan too. They say it does not go far enough. The Lower Basin has these huge farms that use a ton of water, and they do not use it particularly efficiently. So states in the Upper Basin want them to take even bigger cuts that account for their big water use.
Okay, well, who else wants a say in this?
There are two big groups here, and they are two groups in the Colorado River Basin that sometimes don't get a lot of attention when states are arguing about how much water should go where. That is Native tribes and the environment. So groups representing both of those interests also submitted their own letters to the feds. There are 30 tribes that use Colorado River water, and 19 of them so far, they might even add more, they all signed onto this letter with specific demands for the federal government.
And is there agreement among the tribes as far as what they're asking for?
This is what's really interesting here. You cannot really lump the tribes together into one group. They are all in pretty unique situations based on their finances or where their land is. So the fact that you can get 19 of them to agree on this broad set of ideas, that's kind of special. Tribes were excluded from those foundational talks about sharing water all the way back in the 1920s. And largely, they still feel like they're being left on the sidelines today. So they're asking for a real set-in-stone seat at the table when it comes to negotiating water. Tribes hold rights to a quarter of the river's flow, but a lot of times they don't have the money or the infrastructure to use that. So they're also asking the government to make sure they have the ability to lease that water to cities and farms or get paid to leave it in the river.
Okay, leaving it in the river sounds like the best option for the environment. Who is looking out for the environment here?
Yeah, this is that next proposal. There's a group of conservation nonprofits that sent their own letter to the government. Like the tribal letter, it is a little less hard and fast in here's who should have water and who shouldn't. It's more a set of ideas to keep in mind while deciding the future of the river. It basically boils down to this, don't forget to leave enough water in western rivers to benefit all the plants and the fish and the birds and all the things that live near streams and wetlands and everything in between.
Well, Alex, the federal government has quite a bit to consider here. What happens next?
Honestly, they aren't really expected to adopt any of these proposals on their face. They really want the states to put their heads together and agree on something before they take any action. I talked about this process with Elizabeth Cobley. She researches water policy at the University of Nevada, Reno. She said states might be heading in the right direction.
I increasingly am of the mindset that this is a necessary step before they find common ground. Everyone needs to put what they want most on the table and then kind of negotiate back from there.
So the good thing is there is still some time left right now to do that, but maybe not as much as you'd think. Even though these new guidelines don't go into effect until 2026, there is a lot of paperwork that has to be done first. Mm-hmm. And the Biden administration is saying, look, just in case we lose the November election, you states better get us a proposal by the end of 2024, just so we can kind of get that ball rolling. States, meanwhile, they say they are committed to meeting and finding compromise, but I've been hearing some rumblings across the Western water world, and so far, it does not sound like they are particularly close to agreeing on a whole lot.
Well, Alex, maybe the ultimate question for us here, how is this going to affect us here in northern Colorado?
Well, I'll say this. In the short term, it probably will not affect us much. But that said, there is a finite amount of water in northern Colorado's supply every year, and that has to get stretched out across growing populations. So we might see, rules that mean you should use less water at your house. One of the most effective ways to do that is by changing your outdoor watering habits. If you have a green, grassy lawn, it's going to be pretty thirsty, and you can use a lot less water by replacing that with native plants that use less.
Alex Hager covers the Colorado River for KUNC. Alex, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. It's always good to be here.
For more on the Colorado River, be sure to check out our podcast, Thirst Gap. It's available wherever you like to listen to podcasts or at KUNC.org. That's it for us today here on In the NOCO. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with more of what's happening in northern Colorado.